Hello everyone, thank you for coming to my talk. I'm talking about selling DevOps and my name is Vanessa Love. Hopefully you're having a great time at NDC, first day, day one. I hope there have been quite a few interesting talks and you've had a good time so far. Hopefully I can continue the trend. So I'm going to start talking a little bit about me, and it's going to be really nerdy, and I'm hoping it eases my nerves a bit because for whatever reason I'm oddly nervous right at this moment. And that's because I gave a gardening talk at DDD Brisbane, and I can't live up to the hype of this talk because everybody liked it so much. So this will be about 50% as good as my gardening talk at DDD, potentially. I also gave a gaming talk at DDD. And as a nerd and as a gamer, I've spent 15,000 hours playing this particular game. It's not a typo. 2 years ago, it was just over 10,000 hours. This is a World of Warcraft tattoo. So, yes, nerdy gamer that leads a guild and run raids. Back in a past life, as part of my career, I did some Linux sysadmin work where I had to deploy code manually onto Linux servers. That was quite painful and led into my career in DevOps. My current role is a DevOps job. I work for a government organisation and my title is Assistant Director of Integration of DevOps. I love what I do. I'm very good at what I do. I'm very into what I do. But it's a bit of a thing in the industry to have a DevOps job, so we might get into that a bit. So we'll look at the agenda of what I plan to talk about today. We're going to attempt to define DevOps from a developer's point of view. We're going to then talk about why everybody might be a bit passionate about DevOps and have very strong opinions. We'll talk a bit about what I do in my role as a DevOps professional. And then we'll talk about why it's so difficult to sell DevOps. I'll pass on some strategies on how you can sell DevOps as well. So there's a thing in the industry where they say you can't buy and sell DevOps, that you can't give somebody money and then suddenly have DevOps. But I'd like to say that I'm a bit of a DevOps seller, hence, would you like to buy some DevOps? So let's have a look at defining DevOps. I was quite fortunate, and I really have to thank, starting here. What is DevOps? So it's a combination of developer and operations. That's what DevOps stands for. And I was quite fortunate in the last week and a bit because Microsoft did something that made everybody really, really opinionated. They changed VSTS to be called Azure DevOps. So I thought, why not, for this presentation, let's define DevOps from Twitter. Might be a bit of a fun activity if we type in DevOps and see what comes up and see what people are saying about it. But here's some of the tweets, the many tweets about what people thought about this change that Microsoft made. Gee, I sure am glad we can just buy DevOps from Microsoft now and we don't have to deal with that pesky organisational culture transformation anymore. Lots of sarcasm in that tweet. When somebody said DevOps doesn't equal CI/CD, this is a terrible name and adds confusion, there was agreement that it's going to confuse tools with being DevOps, and tools won't do the job if the culture's not there. And then we have CI/CD is important, but small piece, often associated with DevOps practices. But this name term brushes away the cultural pieces that are most important. This leads people to believe you can buy DevOps, and that is not okay. Capitals, really, not okay. So let's take these few tweets and try and figure out what is and isn't DevOps. So DevOps isn't something you can buy, and it's not a tool or a set. DevOps is culture. And it's a small part CI/CD, but I think we can take from that it's the practices, not the tools, that are used for either of those processes. So I decided to look at another phrase in Twitter, which was DevOps is not. And people were pretty much telling me my job is not a thing. So DevOps is not a separate job. It is not a job. It is a way of working where developers break silos and do all the things. If you have a DevOps department or you're at a DevOps, you're doing it wrong. Thanks, David. So repeat after me, DevOps is a culture and not a team or job title. And please stop telling me that you have a DevOps engineer. DevOps is a culture, it is not a job description. So we'll go back to our list. And strongly again, DevOps is culture. Everybody definitely believes that. But it's definitely not a department or a job or a role. So my current role is something, I haven't really defined it yet. Maybe we'll change that name a bit. I then thought, I sell DevOps a lot. Is this a new idea? And what surprised me is a lot of people believe that you can sell DevOps, but you can't buy it, unless it's on a USB stick with a nice shiny label. And again, you can sell DevOps, but it's not something you can buy. So I've got a few people in agreement here. I'm not the only one that feels this way. And again, you can sell DevOps, you just can't buy it. There have even been panels in conferences of people talking about selling DevOps to your company. So if we look back at the list, DevOps is something you can sell. What it really made me wonder is if we should change DevOps to be developer opinions. But why is everyone so passionate? And it's because of this idea of a culture. When we have DevOps in an organisation, we have different parts of culture that need to be defined and changed and sold to help DevOps get embedded in your organisation. So we're going to talk through a little bit of these culture ideas. The first one is collaboration. And in small organisations, you might be really lucky to have developers who can do all the DevOps. They can do everything that's needed for getting code from commit all the way through to production and do a lot of monitoring. In larger organisations, sometimes medium organisations, we do have these different departments. And collaboration is talking between the different departments, from security to operations and development, get business involved too. But we want a lot of collaboration. We want people to agree in these departments of the best way for something to happen and nobody to get angry or throw things over the fence. It really comes down to there's a shared responsibility of getting that code through to the end environment and not developers write code, hand it over to operations, and then somebody else monitors it and maybe it works sometimes, and if it goes down, hopefully someone will tell me and we can do something about it. But it's more a shared responsibility. What is my code doing in production? How does it get there? Who cares about it? And how can we all make it work together? A big concept is autonomous teams. And this is something that is a hard sell, especially with business. Letting teams work the best way and the way that they feel they can get something done and on their own outside of micromanagement or a lot of management involvement is something that business and management find hard to give up because that's their thing, that's what they do. But we want teams to be able to make decisions that are best for those teams. So this is more of an organisational culture change more than a lower level team culture change. Feedback is really important in DevOps as well. Currently, you can have organisations that give really negative feedback or the feedback given doesn't help. It can be feedback that won't make you want to get better or help each other. It's throwing things around. It's not a good place to be, but we want positive feedback. We want to get feedback from tools and environments. We don't just want feedback from other people. Feedback is a really large part of DevOps culture as well as quality. And quality is one of those words like security that has different meaning in context or from people. Quality can be different levels depending on who you are, what department you're in, what you believe. But we want to look at quality as in, can I get my code through the chain and find problems with it? Can the teams in all areas look at the quality of what is being deployed, how they're deploying it? And then we want to look at continual improvement. And they all work together. We want to continually improve so we can get better quality, and we continually improve by using the feedback we get from any part of the chain. So let's have a little look at a day in the life of me in a government organisation as a DevOps professional. In the morning, I might have a call with developers, and it's a collaborative type call. There's a problem that needs to be solved, and myself as an expert from an external coming in from outside can provide advice, sort of work as a bit of a sounding board if needed. We can look at the processes and work with the different developers. We talk about sometimes the problems we have with other departments, but that's okay because that's feedback I can take and talk to other teams in a way that's a bit less threatening or from the source. But talking with developers to see how I can help them improve their process, or if they just want to know how does this interact with the pipeline as it is, how will it work with the other teams, what should I do? So there's a lot of calls just talking to developers about how we can improve their time. Sometimes I have to write documentation for security reasons. So I wrote a very large document about permissions in Octopus Deploy that were very granular between teams, how it interacted with AD, where all the firewalls were set up. Not very fun. Also not a very good use of developer time. As my time and as somebody who's an expert in that specific product, it was very easy for me to write. But I also had information from the security team, from the infrastructure team, and knew how it had to be set up. So I could write this document to go through the change approval process for our security review. So then I'll have a casual chat with security, which is always fun. In our organisation, at least, security are very overworked, but we do need to make changes. And I asked for things like a single tool to talk to every machine on our network, which isn't a very small change. So sometimes that's a lot of discussions about who should have the ability to hit buttons, who has the ability to log on servers, how the sort of bots talk to each other. But one of my jobs is to talk to security. And then I do really, really boring things like cost-benefit analysis. And that's where I get to talk to everybody, find out how they're spending time and how we can save time in that process if we automate. That one can take weeks. And again, it's not something that in an organisation it's required to get through, get purchase approval, get change management approval. It's not something you particularly want developers working on. Then I'll have a bit of training with the infrastructure team, talk them through the tools, how they're going to use them. And then I might have an update meeting with the capability teams, testing and architecture and agile. When I explained this job to my husband, he said it was pretty much like herding cats. And I have to agree. But what really, really I liked about that analogy is I raid lead in WoW. And I always say, all that is me just herding cats. Like, it's a skill I have. I have to get people to a common goal. And it makes sense that I'm good at it in a DevOps way. But, you know, cats can get distracted. There might be a shiny new JavaScript framework. I wasn't going to name one because there's probably a new one today. So that's okay. And it distracts people. Like, maybe that's more fun than doing a bit of DevOps work. But mostly we do have champions who know that we're a low maturity organisation and they want to move forward, and then people follow those. We do have distractions of the internet. Sometimes things are more fun to do than actual work like integrating their pipeline. But again, there are others that are very, very excited. Sometimes they're really, really excited. But we also have the teams that everything works as it is. Why do we want to make a change? I don't want to make this change. Can't we just keep moving as we want to go? And I have had conversations where, isn't it better to trust a person than an automated process or robot? So these are all things that can distract from finding the happy DevOps path, and it is a bit like cat herding. How can we nicely try and direct them to a happy path? So at this point, I decided that my official title should be cat herder. It's probably not going to happen. What we then need to ask, and this is a very common criticism against having DevOps teams and DevOps roles, aren't you just inserting another silo into an organisation with a whole bunch of other silos? And yes, but it depends. So we'll talk a bit about what my team does in our organisation. There are DevOps teams that are full of DevOps engineers who write scripts and do the process work for getting code through. But that's nothing like what we do. We see it as more, we're there to guide and assist. We have specific domain knowledge. We have very granular knowledge in a lot of ways, and we're able to see what a team is trying to do and guide them in a bit of a better direction, or maybe stop them from doing things slightly incorrectly that would cause more technical debt than they already have at the moment. We also have the ability to look across the entire organisation. So not just inside of our team, but we pretty much don't even look inside our team. We look in all the other teams. We look at development. We look at security. We look at operations. We get a picture of their different pain points and how they can assist each other and better communicate with each other. We also provide evidence for things like change management, or for getting budget approval, or for looking at new tools. We can do proof of concepts very easily in environments by looking at what is the most common case for the entire organisation for majority of projects. And sometimes we have to do boring reviews and reports, but they're part of the job to get budgetary approval for sometimes some very expensive tools that will assist in these processes, but also for the time spent for implementation and getting rid of some technical debt and refactoring. And sometimes we can just be a sounding board for other teams who want to know, how will this work in the organisation? In my role, we use the word DevOps, and it's not because I feel like I'm a DevOps engineer or someone that does DevOps, but it's more to describe my area of expertise. So it's more of an idea of a label of what I can help you and assist you with. It also defines my area of concern in things that I look at in the organisation. So if somebody from one of the departments asks where I'm from, I can say I'm from DevOps, and they'll get an understanding of what I'm looking for and how I might be able to help them. So it's kind of a little bit of a beacon for people to be able to find us and to know that we can assist with things that are DevOps. But it's not me writing scripts and doing implementation, then handing it to a dev team who doesn't understand how it works. We spend a lot of time training them as we go through these tools and processes. But let's have a look at why it's so difficult to adopt DevOps in these large organisations. This is our organisation, and we'll have a look at the major players. So we have senior management on the top floor, and then business is kind of below them. We've got some developers and security, they're guarding the front door. And then operations are in the basement, because I've learnt that from the IT crowd. All right. What happens is there are conflicting goals that each of the teams have. We have upper management who say things like, I need this product delivered under time, under budget, and bug-free. And then the developer's like, wait, did they say bug-free? And then we have operations who just casually jump onto a server and make a configuration change, and it doesn't end up in documentation, it's not in source control, and nobody knows what they've done, and then they go on holiday. We have developers who don't feel they have the time to adopt these practices because the old tech requires so much work. So it's this circular idea of, I spend so much time maintaining the system, I can't make changes to maintain the system. I have security asking me questions like, you want to connect how many servers to one point of failure on our network? And I'm like, all of them? We have operations mumbling something about uptime down in the basement over and over. And then we have business saying, how much can you get done if I throw another person onto your team, but they have no context or knowledge, and you'll have time to train them, right? You can do more. So we have these conflicting ideas of people wanting everything done in their own way, but they don't work together. It comes down to different departments, different goals. We have things like KPIs that conflict. Operations have uptime measurements. They want their servers up all the time. And they know there was a time they deployed code and it took down servers. So if they don't deploy code, it won't take down servers. We have departments who have different training. They have different training in the same tools. They have different training in Agile. And they start to be really different, that they think they're different concepts. And that's because they're not trained together, or they don't have a shared goal or a shared responsibility. And we also have a little bit of organisational disagreement because there are private group chats, and there's been talk of people having negative conversations about specific teams or specific tools in these group chats that then start to spread. And I've had some people come up to me that I've never spoken to before, but through a person of a person suddenly have this idea. And it's been fairly negative, but it spreads a little. So there can be pockets of misinformation and people playing a bit against the system. So selling DevOps. If there's anything I want you to take away from this talk, it's about knowing your stuff. This is the most important part, I believe, and the most success I've had in getting anything changed is knowing my stuff. Coming into a very, very low organisation, and I'm going to use a very specific example here, but it can be applied to any part of the DevOps chain, but we're going to talk about continuous delivery. I know a lot about continuous delivery, and I know a lot about Octopus Deploy. Worked there for a number of years. What it meant is I know a lot about all of the different best practices, key concepts, and why they work. And I've spoken to a lot of people over the years about those things. And what it means is I know all of those best practices. I know what those best practices are, which means that when somebody says, why do you want to do this in a specific way? I have very logical, very strong examples of why I want to do something in a specific way. When I want them to stop rebuilding down the pipeline and deploying a different version than they did in the lower environments, I can take them back to the concept of single artifact, testing that artifact through, making sure the deployment is fine, but the different concepts in continuous delivery. And I haven't had any resistance because the evidence and the detail is there. They sort of go, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. I've never heard that before. And we've just moved forward. Every time somebody said to me, you're not going to get anybody on board with that, I'm like, give me 30 minutes. And at the end, they're like, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't know why we've been doing it that way for so long. So just knowing that finer detail is more than saying we need continuous delivery. It's we need to implement it in a specific way, and we need to stop some bad practices that are in that have given us errors that have been proven to cause problems down the pipeline. They've deployed the wrong package because of wrong link in a thing because the document's been wrong and they're rebuilding here. So it can happen. So Aussie. But it really helps when you know the finer detail because you can spot problems with proposed implementations. And an example of this is databases in continuous deployment. We had a team that wanted to do a specific implementation with Liquid-based to an Oracle server, but what happened was they'd implemented it in such a way that they would need multiple versions deployed in a specific order, and they needed to know the state of the machine beforehand, which completely breaks continuous delivery. But I was able to look at that very small script step and how it had been implemented and see the problem that no one else had been able to see because I knew that that would be a problem. That's why you really do need detail in what you're trying to implement. You want to stop problems before they occur, but you can only do that when you have finer detail. It helps in the justification when you are saying, you shouldn't do it this way, this is why, this is a problem I see. And these are industry examples that we found potentially on blog posts, Twitter, wherever we find our information. As tech people, generally when we do want to learn something, we do go out and get that information. So it shouldn't be too much of a shock to say, if you want to start in something in DevOps, go out and get some of the more domain knowledge, look at the examples and get the finer detail, because you will come across these problems in trying to sell the concepts to your team. So how can we actually sell something you can't buy? And it's because we're not selling anything that's physical. That's why we can sell it. We're selling concepts and we're selling ideas and we're selling culture. It's when you don't want someone to make a purchase, but you really want them to buy into an idea. That's when you can sell something that you can't buy. One of my suggestions for learning to get buy-in from any department is learn to speak their language. It's a big part of their goals. We've talked previously about they have different goals. And so business have goals like cost, time, customers, resources. It's just for Damien. But they want to know how much cost will I save or how much cost will a tool give. But if I spend that money, how much time will save? Do I need more people? Do I need less people? Speaking in those terms, providing evidence allows you to get faster buy-in instead of saying, well, it's an awesome deployment automation tool that just connects securely to these machines. It's not language or information that they actually care about or that's going to help them make decisions. When talking to developers, you could talk about efficiency and tech debt removal. Generally, they're looking at things that they know are really old technology that they have to maintain, that every time they open it and make a commit to this really convoluted old configuration file, they know there's stuff in there they don't use anymore, but they can't spend time doing. They know that there is small little tech debt wins that they could make, but you start talking to them about things like maybe we could refactor it while we're implementing something else, which is another strategy to get pretty good buy-in. Which does lead into empowerment. Empowering these teams goes back to another DevOps concept, which is autonomy. Giving people the ability to make decisions that are sound decisions, and even if they do fail, allowing them to fix it and not be held too accountable, depending, I guess, on the failure. But we did things like allowed the developers to refactor. So there were configuration. We had one team that had 3 services in a single repository. They were all using a single configuration file, which meant that a small change to one service, everything has to be redeployed, problems. We said, in your time that we have allocated, we'll give you permission to refactor. Split them into 3 repositories, update your configuration, make it more efficient for you. That makes them very happy and it makes them a bit more excited to go on the journey, especially when the configuration part is like 80% of the work. We need them there and happy to be doing it. They need the empowerment to adapt. If the generic process that we've come up with for an organisation in total doesn't exactly fit in their team, let them change it. As long as it's not something that's going to completely break the purpose of what's happening, allow them to make those changes that fit more with their team. A lot of these finer and minute details don't really matter. A lot of the time, there can be small things that won't be as efficient, but it doesn't really matter when it comes down to it. So allowing them to adapt and work for their team gives them more comfort and they know it's going to work for them. And just give them free rein to continually improve. So starting on their project, ending maybe a pilot or an assistive integration, allow them to start tweaking it and make changes that work for them. Add more things like testing. So we had one team and we finished with them and they're like, this is great. I'm just going to start adding automated testing at the end of it. And we're like, okay, please just do it. And they're like, we've never been able to do this before. We've had to go through other departments. We've had to get somebody else to run it. We've never been able to just trigger it after a deployment. So they started seeing ways they could improve because they had the basis of starting, but we didn't stop them from doing it. We want them to continually improve. And this might be, one of those sort of lessons, but there's a lot of opinions where people end with, you're doing it wrong. Even some of those tweets we saw there, you're doing it wrong. DevOps itself talks about continual improvement, which means you do have to start somewhere. And if there are teams that might need to start with just source control and you don't agree with how they're using source control, that's okay. They can adapt and they can grow and they can get better. And then, they get their CI working and maybe even they use a tool. I mean, Jenkins does have good deployment stuff, but they use Jenkins to deploy. It doesn't mean that when their environment grows and they have more machines and they need to look at other processes, they can't improve. They're not doing it wrong. They're starting on a process that never ends. I've had people internally say, but this project is ending. Why is it important to go on this path of deployment automation or automation to get through? And I said, well, I don't think you're going to write bug-free software. But also, who's going to support that software once that team moves on? Somebody is going to support it. So them having the ability to make a change, commit it, and move it through the pipeline means that it's set up for them. The other team is then also moving on with this knowledge that we've taught them, and they can use it for the next project. They don't need our assistance. They know how to set them up. They've learned all the lessons that we've taught them. So let's talk about selling this intangible. I've seen this term thrown around, and it's a DevOps Sherpa. And it appears to be a new phrase that's coming through in the DevOps community. It looks like it started in the Americas, and I've only actually seen it on either consultancy style pages or large corporations where they say, we have a Sherpa that can take you on your DevOps journey. So I assume they're meaning maybe a bit of a guide. But looking into it a bit more, and this is why I kind of actually like this analogy a lot, is Sherpas themselves are a group of people in the Himalayas, and the Himalayan mountains to them are spiritual. They base a lot of their religion on events or places in the Himalayan mountains. And when they provide services to mountaineers as guides, it's about respecting the Himalayas, respecting where they are, performing rituals, and showing the outsiders, the people coming to do these activities in this sacred space for them, how to respect that space. So for me, that feels like what we want in the DevOps space. We want people to respect our rituals, and we want them to respect what we're doing because it's a culture. So maybe the term of DevOps Sherpa isn't too far instead of DevOps engineer. So maybe that could be my new role. In summary, DevOps is a culture. We know that. Everybody, every tweet, everybody knows that DevOps is a culture and a cultural change. But we need buy-in for DevOps to succeed. We need to get buy-in from organisational wide for budgets, for change, for integration. So to succeed, we need to sell DevOps. And maybe toolsets should not have DevOps in their name. Probably a bad idea and will cause Twitter to kind of blow up for a little while. But maybe DevOps teams and roles have a place depending on what they do in organisations that have low maturity to provide guidance. I'll end on this quote, which works very well, I think, in this situation. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. a few photos. I'll just let it happen. Thank you. I obviously rushed through that because I'm terribly under time, so we have questions if anybody has any. Yes?
So, thanks for the talk.
That's okay. Thank you.
Do I understand that you're running a team of DevOps Sherpas, say?
Yes, yeah.
Is that how it's set up?
That's right. We have different people in the team who run different experiments or different projects. Yeah, within.
Like internal consultancy kind of thing?
Yeah, internal consultancy, but it's interesting because there's a slight difference in the sense of we've found that when a consultant comes in and does an evaluation and says, do this thing, not a lot of people adopt it, and they're not really available for questions or to provide integration of systems. Like, it does depend, obviously, on how much you pay the consultants, how long they stick around. But it can be, for us, we found, because we are full-time employees and they see us that way and we have specific levels, they're more willing to sort of trust us in the decisions we're making because they see that we're there for the business.
But you also mentioned the shared accountabilities. So how does that work with your team and the development teams? Or they own the responsibility and you're guides? Or how do you make that work?
I didn't share the question before, so for the people at the back, if you're having trouble hearing, the question was, I talked about shared responsibility, but then we also have this DevOps team, so how does that work? Do the developers own or does my team own? We provide guidance and best practice, but we ask the developers to make the decision. So in the way they use Git, in the way they do their deployment, if they want to change processes, we say, what's best for your team and how would you like to see this happen? If we find small problems with their implementation, that's when we say, I see this problem, so we're going to have to find another solution for it, and then we work together. And that's also a bit of a sort of training purpose. When we're integrating them into teams, we don't stop them from making mistakes when we see them make mistakes in training, just so they can see that mistake happen, go through the troubleshooting process, and then fix it, and then they've got that little bit more knowledge than just, oh, don't do it that way. Thanks. Yes?
Do you find that there's always demand from the teams for the help that you can give them, or are there situations where a team maybe isn't performing that well and you're almost going in there to offer a service that they might not be as open to accept?
We ended up having so much success with the pilot teams that we have more people wanting in an assistance than we can actually provide at the moment. So it's a very good problem to have. They saw how we implemented it with those teams and then they wanted to get on board. We did pick very specific teams for the pilots, people that we knew were very enthusiastic about the idea, wanted the change, and that had a bit of influence with the other teams, which is another good sort of strategy to use, people that will follow other people. We did pick one team in there that we knew would be resistant, and we took them along for the ride. They kept saying, no, I don't have time, no, I don't want to go to Git, no, I don't want to do this. And I said, you don't have time, but do you have 6 hours? In 6 hours, I can train you and get you into this product. And so we kind of got a bit of management buy-in at that point, put them in a room for 6 hours, got it done, came out the end, they were happy. We found their pain points, which was configuration management, and integrated that in, taught them how to do it. At the end of the pilot, we had a lot of teams coming to us saying, how did you get that other team on board and why are they so happy? And I can't believe that success. So picking the team sometimes is a bit of a political strategy as well.
So can I follow up with a question? And apologies for the answer at the beginning, but what measures were you using to prove to people that maybe weren't technical that what you were doing was having a positive impact?
We spent a lot of time looking at how much time they were doing jobs around manual deployments. We had team leads that were doing 40 hours a month just in planning meetings for a deployment. They were then spending about 20 hours writing the documentation and change control to get that live. So we said, give me a bit of time and you get all that money back. And because we had 25 teams, it ended up being millions of dollars. So we used the business's language, which was money, and said, do you understand how many meetings and how much documentation is being written here that can be automated for this low cost of a tool and process? No worries. Yes?
On the slide about empowerment, you had a point about giving permission to a factor. Now, obviously, it's sad that in a low maturity organisation we have to do that, but do you think giving permission kind of exacerbates their need to have the permission? Like, what techniques did you use to empower them to not need permission to do their job?
Yeah. It's a really good question. Yeah, like, does that mean we weren't their direct managers, if you know what I mean? So we never asked their direct managers if we could have that. We kind of just said, hey, we've allocated all this time, and if you just happen to use that time to do that thing, then that's okay. So it's kind of like, I'm just happen to leave this money here, and if you just happen to take it, then that's okay. So it made them decide also what they were going to do with that time. I don't know if that really solves that problem, but we didn't have control over anything but the allocated time we have, and we said you could use some of that time for your own purpose.
So in that instance, did you just talk to their managers to say, you need to put aside this time where we work with, is that how it works?
Yeah, kind of. We said that this is the amount of time we need for each project, depending on their size. And if a lot of the teams were actually quicker in that, it was really interesting on how people view time as well. That specific team that refactored the 3 services, the managers still say, even though it's completely successful, that they spent so much time doing that. And I'm like, but they only spent 50% of the time I asked for anyway in total. So it's okay, like it was less time. It's not a bad thing. And now they're deploying a lot easier, faster. They're having less problems. So yeah, it was interesting. We didn't necessarily get in trouble, but it keeps kind of being like one of those things that people bring up. But we'll take that hit. Yeah.
That kind of leads, your point kind of leads on to, like, how do you work with the management team to help them develop? Because they need to understand this mindset as well, right?
Yeah. The middle management was our largest problem, actually. We had senior exec buy-in. My director, before she went on maternity leave, did a lot of work to say DevOps is the reason. And so we sometimes had to get senior exec involved, and then other times we had to get the teams a little involved too. So we sort of put pressure on both sides of management. I don't feel they were very easy to convince, but it felt like they're under an extreme amount of pressure to just deliver. That's their entire, like, you could almost picture their mind just going, I need to get this done, I need to get this done. I don't think we ever really broke through that, but we were able to just say, look, this is really important. I also did use the strategy of don't tell me no, and in that it was, if somebody said, I don't have the time to do this, I said, surely you can spare 6 hours. It's just 6 hours. In that one-day workshop, I was able to onboard the teams that didn't have the time, and they then understood. So it was one of those, that was how we got through to those teams where the management was a bit, we just can't spare time. I'm like, you can spare a day. And they were like, well, yeah. It was one of those strategies, I guess, as well. They couldn't say it to their senior exec that, oh, I can't just give a day, because it was such a small time, and I knew that I could really fit a lot into that 6 hours, and I did. So that was a successful strategy for management. It was probably the hardest area we deal with, is that middle manager layer. Yeah. Yes?
Do you find with this that some of the dev teams are happy to help support with operations and keep that uptime? Because I've seen before with operations teams just don't like going through the logs, they don't understand it, they haven't got the code, where the developers can really get in and keep that uptime because they know what went wrong straight away.
This is a problem. We've got a very interesting situation at the moment, because the change management process said that operations have to be the one that deploy the code, because they're the ones that have access to it. And I asked every operations person, I said, do you understand what you're doing? Do you check the code? Do you even look at the scripts? And they're like, they tell us what's run, we run it. They tell us what logs to get, we get them. And then we implemented my solution so quickly, I didn't have time to do a secondary security review to change who can actually hit that deploy button. So I have operation team hitting the deploy button when, again, they don't understand the process of the scripts or anything like that, and that's something we'd like to change. With operations themselves, I felt they will, like, if during the deployment time they were available, and they would pretty much be almost the button pusher code, like monkey to go in onto the server because they had the permission, grab what the developer need. We had a very rough first deployment to the new environments when we were going to the hire. And even though we spent sort of 8 hours just troubleshooting little bits and pieces of nuances in these, I had operations come up to me and say, "This is so powerful, this is going to be amazing. I am so impressed with this," because they saw they're not going to have to do that kind of thing anymore. And we got buy-in, even though at the end of the day we're all exhausted going, that was terrible. They saw the power in it, even with everything going wrong. So operations, the lower operations, are really into it, and they know the time they can save and they won't have to do this. We're having some interesting, again, middle management sort of buy-in.
So you mentioned going to have to get the logs.
Yeah.
Are you looking at implementing like centralized logging?
They do have login site for specific things, and we also implemented as part of the deployment process to grab the server logs at that snapshot in time, so the developers could just look at it through the tool. But anything that had sort of passwords, it was mostly just things like configuration that had passwords and information. We wouldn't get them off the servers. Maybe operations would go and look at it and provide information through. But yeah, we do have centralized logging. It was more for those really sensitive files. Any other questions? Yes, so I've got two. I'll go down the back first.
So whilst everybody can agree that automation saves money, all benefits,
Yep.
you find people actually find that their personal job is at risk, that they think that, well, they just won't need to run these deploy scripts anymore, or is it literally, well, I'll still have a job, but I've got this other important things to do, I don't want to run those scripts anymore?
Because of budgetary cuts to the specific department, everybody's doing way more work than they really should be. So they see it as, I don't have to do this job that I get in trouble for, that's really monotonous, that I don't really have any control over, and get to do more fun things like start working on continuous improvement in my department. We did do a few risk things before getting in, saying how are we going to deal with that. We just didn't find that it eventuated, because every single person that was part of these manual deployments didn't want to be doing it. So they were all very happy with the idea of, oh, I won't have to do this anymore. When's that date? And can I move on to this project I've been looking at?
I find it ironic that software teams write software for the purpose of automating a business problem, but then automating the deployment seems like a crazy idea.
It's very true. It's very true. I have the slightest bit of empathy in the sense of the customers have the value, and the end users, what you're building the software for, might be income or revenue or the purpose. So they see that as the higher priority than internal. But when you start throwing numbers at them, like you will save $1 million a year on documentation and meetings, then they start going, oh, okay, that's an interesting concept. Yes?
My question was actually a little bit similar to that one, but specifically around database. How have you gone with automating your database deployments?
Oh, deep breath, take a drink.
Is that something you know?
Yeah, database is a bit of a struggle. We have two teams specifically that do database deployments, and one's really on board, really on board. And the other questions it and then calls me into meetings with their management with titles like the problem with Octopus Deploy, and and they don't want to make the change in thinking around that. I've overheard comments such as, trying to think of them specifically, they're fairly negative comments, such as I'm a database developer. Why should I need to worry about how to automate it? Like, that's not my job. I should be writing SQL and not writing, tags to assist the thing. And isn't that support's job? So I've got one team that I really enjoy and we're making progress. The good thing is, though, because we do have the difference in teams, we can start using what the enthusiastic, willing team is doing and spread that over. And we try and put them in rooms together or around each other so they can maybe pull in some of those vibes and happy feelings and excitement from each other. But yeah, the DBAs themselves actually are into it, though. Yeah, it's our database developers that we're having the biggest problem with. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Any others? Well, no, we end up 10 minutes early. Go out and get some snacks. Sounds good. Thank you very much.